Wait, when have you ever been single?
So, something I was not anticipating coming into the second season of Euphoria was Cassie being one of the highlights of the show for me. That does not mean I am necessarily rooting for her or that I think she's a good person. I know some people have a hard time understanding that being entertained by a character does not mean you are endorsing their actions. I love a train wreck and Cassie is delivering. The storyline this season is nothing new when it comes to stories set in high school. A girl getting with her best friend's ex is a narrative that has been done numerous times.
Ex-boyfriends are just off limits to friends. I mean, that is just like the rules of feminism.
It's almost a staple, which is unsurprising because it gives us great content. First, there's the flirtation of will they won't they, then the building tension with the fear of being found out, which eventually reaches a climax when they are exposed, and then the fallout from that. Euphoria hit all these beats really well and took the storyline a step further by using it as the catalyst for Cassie's mental unraveling. This saw her go from the purely sympathetic and depressing Cassie we got in season 1 to the much more disturbed Cassie we got in season 2. In terms of entertainment, I find this to be a massive improvement. But when it comes to how her character is perceived, it's not the best of news for fans of Cassie, because I think it's safe to say that as the season progressed, people have increasingly lost sympathy for her. So what changed? It's the way Cassie's Freudian excuse translates from season 1 to season 2. So let's get into it. Sigmund Freud was the founding father of psychoanalysis, a method of treating mental illness and also a theory which explains human behavior. He believed that events in our childhood have a great influence on our adult lives. Of course, childhood trauma having an effect on what you are like as you grow up is now an obvious concept to us and widely accepted, but it wasn't always that way. Now we are tied to the idea that personality traits and behaviors, particularly negative ones, could have their origins in what was going on during our developmental years. So this is now prominently used in storytelling as well. When developing a character, explaining to the audience why a character behaves the way they do, this Freudian thinking is a frequently used method. Show us what happened to them as a child, and from there people can very easily connect the dots. With dedicated episodes that jump back in time, Euphoria relies heavily on this method to develop their characters. The pilot shows us Rue's childhood issues, among them mental disorders and her father's death from cancer, and how this led to her addiction. Kat's abrupt weight gain in middle school, and sort of being dumped because of it, led to her retreating into an online world, which explains how she ended up with her present-day, inappropriate occupation as a teenager. This Freudian excuse for behavior becomes extra Freudian though when it focuses on the negative relationship a child has with the parent. Nate discovered his father's video collection at just 11 years old. This is bound to rewire anyone's brain in a disturbing way, and it explains why he is the way he is. Then there's Cassie. Her parents got divorced, her father became an addict who completely abandoned Cassie and her family, and she therefore grew up to crave male validation. As far as I'm aware, there wasn't very much discourse about this in season 1 because it's a very simple, recognizable narrative. Cassie was a purely sympathetic character who was treated horribly by the boys around her, including her own boyfriend. And the reason these people felt they had permission to treat her that way was because of her promiscuity. And her promiscuity is a direct result of her issues with her father's abandonment, daddy issues. Very Freudian, he loved this stuff. So at this point in season 1, everyone is in agreement about the origins of her problems. And whether you like her or not, you weren't seeing people criticize her behavior, because she was nothing but a sad girl in an unfortunate situation. However, this becomes more complicated when we get to season 2. Seeing Cassie just be subdued and a victim of circumstance all the time would get very old very fast. And yes, she's still sad and probably even more pathetic than she was last season, but instead we also got an unhinged Cassie who makes the conscious decision to get with her best friend's ex, made worse by the fact that Nate was abusive towards Maddie. On top of that, this Cassie is a lot more outspoken, does a lot more yelling and says what's on her mind, which isn't a good thing because her mind is jumbled and what comes out of her mouth is often very inconsiderate. This has inevitably led to discourse, because on one hand, you have the people still holding on to the Freudian excuse from season 1, saying Cassie is deserving of sympathy because her current behavior stems from her past trauma. And on the other hand, you have others who are sick of hearing about what they view as an excuse that just doesn't hold up anymore, because she's crossed a line and gone beyond what could be excused away as abandonment issues. This back and forth is tiresome to read because I think both groups are kind of missing the point. The first group needs to know you can bring up her past without using it as justification for her actions, and the second needs to know that her past not absolving her actions does not make her past irrelevant. This could all be resolved by drawing a line between the words explanation and excuse, reasoning and justification, motive or pardoning. Here's what I think people need to understand. An excuse is always an explanation, but an explanation isn't always an excuse. And it doesn't have to be when it comes to storytelling. In The Prince of Egypt, and I know this is a random example, but just bear with me, I have a point to make. The Prince of Egypt, great movie, is the Book of Exodus adapted into a DreamWorks animation. And some changes were made to the story. Ramses is often named in adaptations of the Book of Exodus, but he's not actually named in the source text. He's just Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's relation to Moses isn't an adoptive brother who ascended to the throne. It's actually Pharaoh's daughter who took in Moses, and Moses is actually Pharaoh's adoptive grandson. The Prince of Egypt made them brothers because it's more dramatic. You who I called brother, how could you have come to hate me so? Sounds a million times better than you who I called grandson. But with this change comes one more way they needed to deviate from the text in order to make a better movie, and that is giving Ramses some Freudian reasoning of his own. You see, the reasoning we get in the Book of Exodus for Pharaoh being so ridiculously adamant about not letting the Hebrews go, despite all the evidence in front of him, is that God, quote, hardened his heart. Now, people already have a hard time understanding exactly what this means, and I have some complicated thoughts as well, but the point is, when you're retelling this as a movie, especially a DreamWorks animation, the reasoning of God hardening his heart just does not translate. Especially when before Ramses becomes this evil villain, he's shown as a good brother to Moses. Audiences need to know why he is the way he is as an adult. So this is what they did. They threw in the daddy issues and knew that from there, people can easily connect the dots. Ramses' father Seti was extremely tough on him, he was emotionally distant and showed him no love. All he did was place an immense amount of pressure over Ramses and paranoia about being the one weak link that breaks the chain of their dynasty. And just like that, the movie works. Now you ask yourself, when the decision was made to include this plotline, were the writers thinking, ah yes, this is the perfect justification for maintaining slavery? No, it's not an excuse, of course not, it's an explanation. One that is an important piece to the puzzle in enriching a character and telling a satisfying story. It's not about sympathy, it's about context. And instead of a one-dimensional villain, we see a deeper layer to him below the tough guy Pharaoh facade, which kind of makes him a sort of pathetic villain. Now, Cassie is not Ramses, but you know, in some way she is the main antagonist of this season.
I don't even know why you're believing her, she's a drug addict. How long have you been?
Nate's father had his weird liberation and disappeared. Nate is of course always going to be the worst of the bunch, but in writing he's much more toned down compared to last season. Laurie, while definitely giving villainous vibes, isn't prominent enough to be considered the main antagonist. Through every episode, who is it? It's Cassie. Not a hardcore villain by any means, but for sure a pathetic antagonist causing trouble. And yes, last season her Freudian excuse was very much used as an excuse. It isn't anymore. This season, in her transition into a more unlikable, self-centered train wreck, it's an explanation for why she's such a mess. And when people talk about that, it doesn't mean they are excusing her behavior. I'm now going to make the argument that actually, her Freudian reasoning is not only still relevant, it even works better this season than it did last season.
I didn't say you're not a good girl. Rue's had a very hard life.
Not harder than my life or Lexi's life.
When I saw Cassie have that argument with her mother, I was like, yes, this is exactly what I needed. When she was comparing her situation to Rue and tried to make the argument that Rue's was better because the death of a father is better than abandonment, that is when it became crystal clear that they weren't using it as an excuse anymore. Especially with Lexi right there who suffered the same thing but isn't behaving the same way. They know how bad it sounds coming out of her mouth, and she wasn't supposed to come off well in that scene. Same as when she called Rue an addict in front of everyone in order to deflect from what she did. It's the equivalent of a villain giving a monologue of, I wasn't loved as a child, that's why I'm burning the city to the ground. Still an explanation, but it stops being an excuse.
One thing to do what you did, and it's another thing to pretend you're all innocent and it's no big deal.
Truth is, I was really bored by Cassie in season 1, because this doe-eyed, miserable person is a very simple, easy story to tell. It's a lot easier to go with a sympathetic Cassie who has a clear-cut, tragic excuse for her behavior. And like I said, if they kept up with that, it would get very old very fast. past, taking what once worked to add sympathy and then twisting it in an uncomfortable way so that people actually have to question how far her excuse can go, I think is so much better for the show and the character. And what Cassie screamed at her mother is even more interesting because comparing her situation to Rue is something that the audience is supposed to do. There are people that want to disregard her backstory because it doesn't justify her actions, but it is 100% something you should still keep in the back of your mind even if you don't believe it holds up as an excuse anymore. Both Cassie and Rue lost their fathers, both engaged in self-destructive behavior because of it, Rue turning to substance abuse and Cassie turning to male validation regardless of who she hurts in the process. Both have sisters who have dealt with the loss of their father much better than they have. This resemblance but also contrast isn't a secret, Cassie brings it up herself. But why does the audience back Rue and not Cassie? Rue is also hurting people in the process. Rue also says horrible things. Well, the difference is with Rue, we've seen her fight hard against her impulses. We've seen her apologize when back to her senses, and we've witnessed the way she's hurting in a very intimate way. We haven't got that with Cassie. Not yet. Cassie's remaining arc can go one of two ways. Either she spirals all the way down, or she's afforded what has been afforded to Rue. If you believe that what she's done to Maddie isn't excused because of her trauma, I'm with you. But what happens if we see her fight against her impulses, come to her senses, make amends, and we get an intimate look at how she's hurting next season, the same way we've been doing with Rue all this time? Because Cassie is clearly hurting really, really badly. Are you going to afford her the same grace you give Rue? And if not, why not? Let's assume these characters run for 3 seasons. My hopeful scenario is that when we look back at her 3-season arc, we first see a girl that was subdued and beat down, to a girl that was lashing out, to one that deals with and overcomes the root cause of her problems. And this Freudian excuse has room to shift and mold as well. It can shift from season to season. It doesn't have to be set in stone the way some people want it to be, or completely disregarded the way others do. It worked in the first season as an excuse, it doesn't work this season as an excuse, and it's not supposed to. And maybe next season it comes full circle, only that time, with Cassie understanding the limits of her excuse and making the effort to fight back against her impulses. I both believe that Cassie is the antagonist of the season and also believe that she's redeemable. And if she follows this arc, she might cement herself as my favorite character on this show. Anyway, this is my take on the whole Cassie situation. I'd love to hear yours. If there's any Euphoria topics you want me to cover, let me know. As always, thank you for watching. Bye.